Game over, man. Game over. Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger potion. Why so serious? I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 540 for June 27th, 2023. And I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, as we enter into a new phase of the InSession Film Podcast after our announcement last week.
One filled with cynicism, negativity, something we're not normally known for, but I think that'll be the case at least for this episode.
Yeah, this episode might be a little more bleak than usual. However, and we'll get to that here shortly.
Gosh, after that announcement, we're just the saddest people right now. And honestly, the state of movie news, as we're going to be talking about here, it's not making us much happier.
Well, and it doesn't help matters that our latest podcast review was Asteroid City, which is Wes Anderson's most melancholic in a long time, probably since the Royal Tenenbaums.
Jeez.
And then we recently got done seeing Past Lives, another film full of sorrow and melancholy. So it's just sadness all around.
I guess Pixar's Inside Out was right. It's okay to be sad.
It's okay to be sad. Yeah, and I've very much been feeling that this week because we made the announcement last week on the show that Ryan and Jay are no longer going to be regulars on the podcast. They're not co-hosts anymore. You'll still see them around as guests. Jay especially is going to be around. I know he wants to do some video reviews and perhaps a few other things, but you won't see them around as much as what they have been the last 5 years. So we did have a fun time reminiscing last week and saying goodbye to them. And certainly a big thank you once again to them and everything they brought to the podcast over the last 5 years.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's interesting I say we're entering a new phase, and we are because they were so prominent the last 5 years. However, it's almost more like a full circle or, you know, somewhat going backwards a little bit.
Because this is like deja vu or something.
Because, you know, from 2014 to 2018, it was also just Brendan and I with a few co-hosts on Extra Film that would come and go.
Let's give Jay and Ryan some credit for lasting a lot longer than those other great folks that we had on the podcast for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a few co-hosts, Matt Negley and Vince Leo, most notably, and we love them and their short time here. But yeah, Ryan and Jay, they stuck around. They stuck around for quite a few years, which was very
apparently
exciting.
Liked us a little bit more.
Yeah. So, you know, and it's funny. I don't know if anyone else noticed this. I did have a few people reach out to me via text to, I guess, check up on me after last week's announcement. I don't know if anyone else noticed it. And in the moment, I felt it. And when I went back to edit the show, it was so obvious because I was emotionally, like I was holding back. I was doing my best to mitigate it.
In the moment, I thought you were doing a pretty good job holding it back, but I think that only speaks to the ethos that you represent at InSession Film. You're just known as the emotional guy. You're known as the crier of our podcast.
I am. And if you go back and listen to me as I begin that segment, you can hear it in my voice. I am starting to crackle there a little bit. But on the whole, I held it together. I did well, all things considered. But
wasn't quite a midnight special, but
it wasn't quite that, or First Man or A Tree of Life. But you know, when these guys are around us every week for 5 years, like you just get real close, and they're moving on to a new phase, and you know, and so they won't be here every week, and you know, it very much is the Inside Out thing. Like, it's not a bad thing. You just feel sad. There's just a little, you're going to miss them. And that's really all that it is.
Yeah. But they will still be around on occasion, most notably, and we talked about this a lot in episode 539, the end of the year award show. I mean,
Yeah, they'll be back for that.
They're already
for sure.
contracted for it for the next 30 years, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
As long as InSession Film award shows, it's going to be the four of us.
Yeah, exactly. So they'll for sure be around, and they'll be here for that episode, no doubt about it. And then there's the Asteroid City, past lives of it all, as we noted, or as we talked about a second ago. And then I don't know if you can hear it in my voice this week, but my newborn son, who's 3 months old at this point, he just started going to daycare because my wife went back to work. That means there are germs in our house and everybody's sick. Everybody's sick.
Oh, baby flu. Flu.
Baby, yeah, the cold is spreading around everywhere.
Now, how bad is it for you? Because from what I understand, those sicknesses that you get from children, it might not affect adults that horribly in the moment, but it just never goes away because the germs are always around, from what I understand.
Well, when Sam was young, that was the case. It wasn't like I was never like deathly ill.
No.
There were times where Sam got real sick, but yeah, it just kind of lingers. And it's interesting because and I don't know if it's South Florida and where we live, and and Sam still gets sick from time to time, but I honestly haven't had a cold in a long time. A long time. So I mean, but I was prepared for this. I was like, he's been at home. He's been in quarantine more or less.
Yeah.
Even though we've been out.
Whatever he has, he has contaminated every single piece of furniture in your house right now.
Yeah. So that's our life right now. So it's been a little, let's say things haven't been the greatest over the last, 10 days or so.
What are you talking about? It's a blessing.
It is. No,
a germ-filled blessing.
Yeah. So between the sickness, the announcement last week, and some of these sad films, and then there's this week's topic. But
we'll
I feel like it's a
little
conversation
time
we
on
have
it as
to,
possible because we have other things we want to talk about to round out the positivity, though.
Yeah, but I do think while this is maybe a little bleak, I think it's an important conversation that needs to be had. And I guess to lay the cards out on the table, we're going to be talking about, and I don't know how we want to label this, Brennan. Perhaps we can think of something here on the fly. Yeah. But we're going to be talking essentially about the current state of cinema regarding the box office when we consider Pixar and their struggles recently. The Flash flopped big time last week. But that isn't the only superhero film of recent that has underperformed. Many of DC especially have underperformed. There's, of course, the writer's strike going on right now. There's all the conversation around AI. Marvel got into a little bit of a hot mess because of their utilization for AI in the opening credits of their new show on Disney+.
Yeah, Secret Invasion.
David Zaslav is doing everything in his power to completely destroy Warner Brothers.
Turner Classic Movies. What is that again? Never heard of it. I don't think we need it.
The whole TCM news is distressing. There was news that Warner Brothers is selling half of their music catalog because we're in debt, I guess. I mean, it's just been a lot lately. And while this is somewhat of a redundant conversation, it's something that we've had a couple of times here on the show. I think it's worth revisiting given all of this recent news of late.
Yeah.
And
it
so
all just seems to be compounding right now.
It seems to be compounding. I think there are some concerns going forward. And so I think while it might not be the happiest of topics, I think it's one that is worth having. And so I wanted to start the show there before we kind of end on, as Brendan noted, a happier note.
A happier note, yeah. But I do think it is a good topic, especially because we are film lovers. We love this medium, and there are things that it's not that we don't want to see change, but we want to see good change when change is necessary, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of this comes down to us recognizing that the movie business will always be a business. That side of it will never go away. But there's a difference between the business of it all versus the commercialization of it all. And I feel like it's veering dangerously close to that second category nowadays. And
Yeah.
that's a scary thing, especially for those of us that, relish in the in not just the classics, but the preservation of those classics or those forgotten films.
Yeah.
Also the respect, the reverence, and the importance that we always talk about with regard to, you can see a little bit of it back here, physical media, right?
Yeah.
And the always evolving business as it is, it's made people forget about physical media, but it also makes people realize that what they think they always have access to, they actually don't have access to. And
Yeah.
it becomes a completely different conversation, especially when Turner Classic Movies enters the conversation in such a way that it is. It's a really saddening topic.
I agree. And I guess we can certainly start there because the TCM news was distressing. And you make a good point about the preservation of cinema.
Yeah.
I historically speaking, and while we're talking in the context of film, this idea certainly tethers itself much more broadly speaking. But when you erase history, bad things tend to happen.
Yeah.
Now, in the context of film, what does that mean? The stakes aren't nearly as high as it is in other areas of life.
No, it's
However,
true. It's important to us though, and it's important to a lot of people.
yes,
That's the thing.
And here's the thing: like I and you and probably everybody watching, listening to this, if you're watching, listening to this, you're a fan of movies in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely.
And so you're a fan of art. And the preservation of art, I do think, is extremely important, not just film, but all types of art.
Yeah.
And TCM is one of those vital entities that is wholly dedicated to that. Them, Criterion, certainly a few others as well.
Yeah.
And having them around to help preserve history and film and everything that's preceded. And you think about how film has infiltrated the zeitgeist throughout the last, century or so, how it's influenced pop culture.
Yep.
Movies are such a foundational element, I feel like, of United States culture. Anyway, I can't speak for other countries, but here certainly is. And so having something like TCM around is crucial, especially in the world of streaming. And this is perhaps where all of these areas or all of these, different arms of film that we're going to be talking about in this conversation, that it's kind of where they start to blur a little bit, because in the world of streaming and digital media, physical media is harder and harder to find.
Yeah.
And that means the preservation of cinema becomes much more challenging.
Absolutely.
And so having the folks at TCM, Criterion, we might not think about it on a day-to-day basis. And certainly these executives don't think about it at all.
No.
But removing them, I think, is a major step backwards. And hopefully this can be remedied.
I agree, because we can't only rely on word of mouth to keep that preservation alive, right? Otherwise, many things are going to need to change. Like film studies in high school and universities in particular are going to have to be strengthened or some way. And I feel like that's going to be another conversation that we don't even want to have here, because that requires different forms of funding and all this other stuff to go into the education system to keep that preservation in that specific capacity. Yeah. But I think another thing is that if something like TCM were to go away, God forbid it doesn't, but if it were, then I think that means the state of film criticism also needs to change, right? And we talk about this a lot. This could even be its own side topic, but we sometimes sense that the state of film criticism, at least as it relates to social media and film Twitter, has kind of, I guess, devolved is the right way to put it, because it becomes kind of a game. It becomes kind of this this play for attention and for getting the first word of mouth first. And I think honestly, and this is not a knock on any certain critics group or anything like that, but if we want to keep the preservation of these classic films alive, and these companies and these streaming platforms are not going to acknowledge that, then I think modern film critics such as ourselves are going to need to reevaluate the way that we continue to talk about films in order to keep that conversation going, not just for our listeners, but just in a general sense too. So things would have to change, unfortunately.
I agree. And in addition to perhaps the social media element of it, or the educational part of it, as you're kind of alluding to there as well.
Yeah.
I think one thing that would also help is these streamers, because I don't think they're going away anytime soon.
I agree.
One thing that they need to do, and we briefly talked about this maybe last week on the show, or maybe this was a conversation we had offline. I can't really recall, but one thing that these streamers need to do a better job of is making these older films, these classic films, more accessible in terms of search and getting it in front of people. Because something like
category or something.
Yeah, because, Amazon Prime or Max itself, they have a lot of really great classic movies, or just anything pre-1990.
Yeah.
But it's hard to find. They're really hard to find, unless you're a cinephile like us and you're searching these things, and then your algorithm starts to manifest around that.
You just said the word I was going to say, because my first thought could have been, is that an algorithm thing? Like, is it only really recognizing that user's particular patterns and their usage habits? And in some cases it is, but I mean, when you first go on to, let's say, Max for the first time, like you've just first initiated your account and you're on there for the first time, the first things you see are movies and television programs that came out in the last 6 months or something like that.
Yeah. It's all new stuff.
And those home pages, regardless of what your habits are, they tend to always be geared towards the present. And it's not like Netflix, at least Netflix, I'll at least give some credit to that. If you scroll enough, you'll find its own row of like classic blockbusters or classic romances or something like that. And a lot of times it might reconfigure itself based on what your habits are, but that doesn't always happen. In fact, I'd say more than half the time it does not happen.
Well, and the thing with Netflix, I feel like their algorithm panders similarly, in the sense that you have to search for these things, but also the depth of their catalog is one of the weakest comparatively to all of these others.
True.
Like,
maybe that's why it's easier to find, because there's less stuff, so they're more easily categorized in that sense.
I don't know. Maybe I'm being facetious here, but maybe not. Like, I don't know if they have anything pre-1985. Like, they just
Netflix specifically. Let me think about that.
I mean, and again, I'm being perhaps.
I know. I saw Out of Africa on there the other day. So I mean, I think that is 1985, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess that meets your threshold.
But comparatively to Max or Amazon Prime and others, that have such a deeper catalog. But regardless, like, these movies are extremely difficult to find. So in terms of preservation, like, what Warner Brother, like the executives at Warner Brothers, one thing that could maybe help them with their sense of history in terms of the decisions they're going to make is if these classic movies get more play because they're in front of eyeballs. Yeah. But when they're hidden and they're not getting plays, all they look at a sheet of paper and go, nobody's watching this film from 1947, so why do we have it on here?
They're looking at it as a data analyst would, which is a job that you need in any type of business, even like this, but there needs to be a counterbalance there, right? It's like in any business, you can have someone running the numbers and looking what makes sense financially, but then where's the marketing person who knows the customer base, right? To kind of find that compromise. And that element there that we feel is so important from that creative point of view, rather, that's what's missing here, unfortunately. And it just seems so numerically superficial.
I agree. And I don't know if that's what's driving the decision around TCM, but
I don't know.
My guess is the numbers well, I mean, Warner Brothers is, I mean, they're cutting back drastically all around.
Yeah.
But, you know, when movies that, you know, relate to the Turner Classic brand, when they're not getting nearly as much play because they're really hard to find, you know,
Makes it sound like an agenda or something.
Yeah, well, it becomes like the decisions are myopically driven.
Yeah, it's not like it's not the classic movie's fault, right?
No,
and that's the problem. It's the way it's categorized and how easy it is to find. So it's like Warner Brothers trying to make a correction for their own mistakes for not giving certain channel outlets equal weight, right? And that's the unfortunate reality there.
And it's also not like they're marketing TCM. I mean, forget the movies themselves, but TCM as a brand, is there any money put behind them at all?
Probably not.
Probably not, right?
And it's unfortunate because they have a lot. Max specifically has a lot of great classic film content on there. I mean, at least I think every single Charlie Chaplin film is on Max right now. Yeah. At least most of them. All of his full-length feature films, I think, that he has directed are on there, if I'm not mistaken. But my fiance Maris and I just watched The Circus the other night. Like it's the stuff is there, and it's the Criterion transfer, so it's a good transfer on Max. But like man, you have to dig for that. It's just
you do. Maybe the best outcome here, and this is a little bit of a tricky idea because I'm conflating two very different things. But if preservation is the game here, you know, maybe Warner Brothers could sell, you know, if they're selling their music catalog, maybe they can sell their classic catalog to something like Criterion. Not that every single one of those movies would be quote unquote Criterion qualified, but Criterion as a brand has more than proven themselves as these stewards of film preservation and film history. Yeah. So even if the film, not all the films would qualify for a Criterion release per se, but handing the reins of the TCM brand to Criterion, maybe that's the play here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how that would work.
I don't know how that would work either.
That would probably come down to a lot of negotiating, a lot of transfer of maybe certain rights that certain films hold. I don't really know. I feel like there's a lot of moving pieces there, but in a broad, from a broad point of view, I could see your point. And
I'm just thinking out loud,
at
but
least a way that's you could transfer ownership of something so that it just doesn't fully go away.
Exactly. And that's the thing here. Yeah. I just don't want those movies to disappear. Yeah. And if Warner Brothers isn't going to care, then give them to somebody that is going to care. Yeah. It's like every year I beg the Academy to let me and a few of our colleagues vote for Best Original Score because the Academy doesn't care, but I do. Like that's a category I want to take care of.
Yeah, apparently they also don't care about animated film all that much either when they think a movie like Song of the Sea is some Chinese film or something.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I have no idea if that quote was accurate or not, but I mean, we heard that back in the day when Song of the Sea was up for Best Animated Film.
Yeah, that was one of those anonymous ballots.
Yeah, who knows if that was true? It could have been fabricated. I don't know, but at the same time, if it wasn't, I wouldn't be surprised.
At any rate, I hope that TCM finds a home somewhere, or that Warner Brothers wakes up and realizes that this is important and we need to take care of this.
Let's hope that emergency call that apparently occurred with Zaslav from who is it? Spielberg, Scorsese.
Oh, the director's Avengers.
Yeah, the director's Avengers. Yeah, let's hope they talk some sense into him.
Yeah, Scorsese, Spielberg, and PTA, I believe it was. Yeah. That's the Avengers movie that I'm really looking forward to, whenever that comes out.
Oh, man, me too.
Speaking of animated films, let's talk about Pixar. So I guess we're going to have a broad conversation here about box office and where we stand post-COVID, because things are not great necessarily, and we'll certainly get to the superhero part of it here in a minute. But
yeah,
when we look at Pixar. So I have the box office up here for these movies, and I'm just going to talk right now everything that has come out since COVID. Okay.
Okay.
So that begins with Onward, which was right before or like right as COVID started, right? So these numbers, it's interesting to think about what Onward could have done if COVID didn't happen. The numbers could have certainly doubled. I mean, who knows? However, as it stands, worldwide, it made $133 million, which isn't great by Pixar standards, right?
Right.
Soul comes out in December of 2020, 118. Again, this is the height of COVID, so it's a little understandable because I think those films also came out on Disney Plus simultaneously.
Did Onward? I
Or
don't think
close.
Onward did. I know
It
Soul
was close.
did. Yeah.
Yeah. Luca then in 2021, in June of 2021, that one makes $49 million worldwide. Wow.
Well, yeah, and that one wasn't that kind of advertised as like a Disney Plus exclusive?
And that,
sorts?
yes, I think that was a little simultaneous. Same thing with Turning Red, because Turning Red, it was around $11 million, but that came out on Disney. Like those two came out on Disney Plus, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that here in a second, right?
Yep.
So Lightyear comes out last year, $218 million, which is a swing in the right direction, but still a far cry from Pixar's best.
Yeah.
And then Elemental at $123 million worldwide, $68 million domestically. So to put that into context, here's what we got from Pixar pre-COVID in the 2010s. I'm not going to go through all of them.
Yeah. Just some heavy hitters.
Just some heavy hitters. So Toy Story 4 was the last film to come out pre-COVID. And that made $1 billion. Toy Story 4 hit $1 billion. Incredibles 2, the year prior in 2018, did $1.2 billion. Coco does $800 million.
That was going to be my next question. Where's like something like Coco, how we can counterbalance that from the franchisees that have such a fan base already going into those films?
Well,
but even so, Coco, that's
very good.
That's a number. That's a number.
Yeah. Now, Cars 3, and this is perhaps because people didn't love Cars 2, Cars 3 only did $383 million. So that's a far cry from something like Coco. However, right before Cars 3, you have Finding Dory, which is a sequel to a beloved film, and that made $1 billion. Finding Dory, an awful movie.
I wouldn't go that far, but I don't like it either. But still, it's a sequel to a beloved film. And Cars 3 was a sequel to a not beloved film, so maybe that played into it. And
then non-IP, going to Inside Out, my favorite of the bunch, $850 million. Did very well. Very, very good. Monsters University, $743. That's
a movie. That's a movie I get pretty close to saying. I wouldn't say terrible, but I don't think it's very good.
Yeah, so, I like it much more than Finding Dory, for whatever that's worth.
I don't. I'm the other way around.
No, I'm definitely pro Monsters University comparatively.
Okay, all right.
Brave, 554. And then Toy Story 3, I'll end it here. Again, $1 billion. Worldwide.
That was $1 billion 13 years ago. Let's put that into perspective as well.
Yeah. I don't know if that includes re-releases. I don't know, because I'm pretty sure some of these got some re-releases.
Good point. Especially leading up to Toy Story 4, if there was there was a small run, I think, of Toy Stories 1, 2, and 3 for like a weekend or something like that.
Yeah, like I know Inside Out recently got a re-release. So like, some of this might be inflated slightly, but still it says a lot about, like the re-release numbers aren't going to change the overall numbers that much. So like the point still stands that Pixar regardless of what you think about the quality, and we talked about this quite a bit in our Elemental review.
Yeah.
For anyone that missed it, you can go and check that out. But we talked about the volatility of Pixar post Toy Story 3. The quality has been uneven, certainly debatable.
Yeah.
But these movies still made a lot of money, regardless. Didn't matter. Made a lot of money. And then everything onward till now, huge steep dive.
Yeah.
And part of that, again, is COVID. It's not Pixar or Disney's fault. You can't control a global pandemic.
Yeah.
So that is part of it. And that's understandable. However, Lightyear and Elemental, particularly Elemental, and it's going to be interesting to see what these next few Pixar films will be like from a box office perspective. You got to think that living in a post-COVID world now, the release strategy from Onward through Luca and Turning Red, that's got to be playing massive dividends to what is happening now.
That is definitely playing a part because it's sending a message to moviegoers that certain Pixar films are eventually going to be on Disney Plus very soon, if not there already. And because movies like Luca and Soul and Turning Red already set that precedent. And I don't love Soul like other people do, but it was a very well-received film. But I'm very high on Luca, as we've both talked about. I think that's top 5 Pixar, and Turning Red I think is very good. I think I like it. I think I like that more than you do, actually. But I would have loved to see these movies in theaters, but the push for Disney Plus, which was still kind of new at the time, there was a lot of dialogue around the launch of it and trying to gain awareness of it. And I think one of the things that Disney wanted to do was to have premiere content, and they thought these Pixar films were a great outlet for it, which has created this narrative, right? That movies, even like Elemental, for instance, which is not one of those movies, it's in theaters only right now, but it still creates this narrative that it doesn't need to be seen in the theater. And that's kind of unfortunate. Now, I will say, with those numbers you read off for Elemental right now, they're not great. But I feel like it's at least going more in the right direction after everything that we've seen. And that's where I'm secretly hoping that when we get more original content from Pixar in the next couple of years, we at least see those box office numbers slowly escalate and they go up more and more each year. I don't know if it'll get to those same billion-dollar numbers that movies like Toy Story 4 or Incredibles 2 were doing. But it does look like there's at least maybe some potential light at the end of the tunnel, that we're eventually getting away from that narrative for certain properties, and that could at least be a good thing if we're trying to take some optimism out of this.
Yeah, I'm gonna be fascinated to see maybe not just Pixar, but animated studios in general.
Yeah,
and I don't have the numbers from the other studios in front of me, but I'd be curious if there's correlation, though, especially because Pixar, of the animated studios, is probably the most prestigious. They certainly don't have the history of Walt Disney.
They have the reputation now because of that amazing run that we've talked about many times from like 2000 to 2010 really is like that whole decade is. I mean, if you're not a Pixar film, then then you're not going to win Best Animated Feature at the Oscars. That's just how it worked.
Yeah, for sure. And even as we demonstrated, everything pre-COVID still did bonkers at the box office. So
right,
I'm going to be real curious to see what these next few years look like, because COVID certainly established a familiarity for movie-going audiences and a comfortability of watching movies at home. I think this is part of the superhero conversation as well.
Yeah, that's
coupled
fair.
with the fact that it is very expensive to go to the theaters. And, I have 2 children now, one of them not old enough to go to the theaters. But if I was to take my wife and son to a movie, $60 easy.
Yeah.
Between tickets and food, it's expensive. And there are a lot of families that just can't afford to do that all the time.
Yeah.
In addition to streaming and the endless options that's there. And then you can talk about home theater systems. It's easier to just, I got a really comfortable couch. I can just watch it there on my giant 95-inch TV or whatever you have.
Yeah.
So
that's the other thing that we could talk about too, is that the whole vibe of going to the movie theater nowadays has kind of changed. And that's also kind of a sad thing. Maybe a separate conversation, but it's a new mindset that people have adopted, that it's kind of like doing remote work for your job, right? It's like, if you could do everything at home, what's the point in leaving?
Well, and honestly, I think that's an interesting comparison, because the job market has adjusted accordingly as well, where people either aren't working because they've realized that I don't need to work, and COVID brought that out in a lot of people.
Completely changed their mindsets. Yeah.
Absolutely. Or I can work remotely. I can work from home. I can do my job from home. And that has also become much more of the norm than it ever was pre-COVID. Yeah. And that does translate to cinema as well.
It does.
And that people would simply rather watch from home. I think there's also a conversation to be had about the social media age in general, how we're addicted to our technology and we're much less sociable than we were 20, 30 years ago. That's probably part of this as well. All these factors are a concoction. And now that we're in a post-COVID world where it's easier to watch from home, especially with young children, where, you know, do I want to spend $100 to take my kids to see this, or just wait 2 months because I know it's going to drop on Disney Plus?
And that's the other thing too. Yeah. You notice a lot of these timelines between when something releases in theaters and when it's available to rent on, let's say, Amazon Prime. Those timelines are shrinking.
Much shorter. Yeah. I mean, and
even when you do want to rent something on Prime, a lot of times it has that initial fee of like $20 to rent before it actually goes back down to $6. But even so, if you have a household with you, paying $20 to rent something, that's still way cheaper than going to the movie theater.
Absolutely. And look, as a father of two, admittedly, the convenience of that is very helpful to me. I mean, there's plenty of movies I've seen this year where I simply wasn't able to make it to the theater because of being a father.
Yeah.
And I just didn't have time. But a month after its release in theaters, it drops on Amazon for $20. And I'm like, yes, I'll pay the $20. So the convenience of that is something that admittedly I have participated in. And I think that mindset is part of perhaps why a lot of these movies have suffered comparatively to what it was pre-COVID. And then also the other thing too that we have to mention here is that Luca, we mentioned that it only did $50 million at the box office, which isn't a lot. However, it did extremely well on Disney Plus.
Yeah,
it did very well.
That was a hugely popular movie with families.
It was a hit.
Like my fiance's nieces and nephew love that movie. Yeah. And they're 9, 5, and 3 respectively. But when they were watching that movie, 2 years ago, minus 2 years from their respective ages, and they were still enjoying that movie. Like a lot of families really dug it. Yeah,
that seems like one of those Pixar movies that if it came out pre-COVID would be in
that could be $1 billion movie, I feel like, because I weirdly feel like that's one where families would have been going to see multiple times because kids kept wanting to go.
Or at the very least it'd be in that Inside Out range of 100 or 850.
Inside Out, Coco, somewhere in that same
somewhere
range.
in that range.
That movie was sadly a victim of circumstance and a victim of a certain release strategy that Disney was trying to test the waters with. And maybe they learned from their mistakes with that one.
Well, and that's where things become complicated, right? Because if you're a Disney executive and you're looking at these numbers post-COVID and you're like, look, people want to stay home. we drop a Luca on Disney Plus. Look at these numbers. They're doing gangbusters. Do we need to release these movies in theaters? Now, obviously,
so maybe we have to maybe I now officially dislike Luca for that reason.
Well, and so part of this, it's not even just the amount of plays that it gets, because you have to consider also subscriptions. Are people subscribing to see these movies? And I don't have those numbers in front of me.
I don't either, but you have to assume that maybe the marketing of it being a Disney Plus exclusive, it earned more subscriptions in the process.
Yeah, I would think so. So from Pixar's end, and for the sake of conversation or for the sake of debate, let's say that Luca did render a lot of subscriptions at the time, and it was this big hit. It got lots of views. So from Pixar's end, while it didn't have the conventional box office numbers, it was as successful as anything they did pre-COVID.
Right.
So now moving forward, now that we're on the other side of COVID, what do we do with these movies? Do we follow Luca's footsteps, or do we go to theaters the way it was pre-COVID? But we've conditioned families that would see these Pixar movies to simply watch them at home.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Lightyear and Elemental have struggled. There
was some pretty bad marketing there too, and I think that's also part of the conversation. Yeah. Well, to be fair, Pixar has been notoriously mediocre at marketing their movies because a lot of it is mostly just they always seem kind of secretive about what their movies are at times until like the official trailer comes out, and even those have never really been that great. Like pretty much every official trailer for every Pixar movie I think has been pretty mediocre. I don't feel like they're the best
marketing.
At marketing
could be it. I mean,
because
I wasn't blown away by the trailers for Elemental or Lightyear.
Yeah,
I don't know, and we talked about this on the show. I don't know if Lightyear did a very good job of distinguishing that this is the movie that
people had no idea what that was.
Had no idea. And so
and then they get that opening text that tells them what this movie is, and then they're watching it. It's like, wait a minute, this is not what you even said it was.
And Buzz is a different voice. Maybe they weren't aware of that going in. I don't know. That could be part of all the confusion around that movie.
Yeah,
so.
which kind of makes me think that maybe Pixar they're in a bit of a unique spot. I don't know if this is necessarily emblematic of Pixar just not doing well at the box office in general, or people being a bit more disinterested in their content. And that's why I wanted to highlight Elemental, at least showing some sense of financial escalation when compared to Luca and Turning Red and some of these other films. But then again, it also had more theaters to play in. It wasn't exclusively on Disney Plus, but maybe there is some potential room for growth. And even if it's not a great number that's tied to it now, maybe Disney and Pixar can see that as, let's still try to release original content in theaters. Let's try to get back into that momentum and see if it continues to grow. And maybe something else you do is, like, in 5 years, release Luca as a 5-year anniversary in theaters and try and get more awareness that way, because these Pixar films come out once a year. So it's not too far off for maybe testing the waters in that way too.
Yeah, I'm going to be real curious next year, because I believe Inside Out 2 is slated for next year, if I'm not
Inside
mistaken.
Out 2, and then there's one called Elio or something like that. I think they have 2 films coming out maybe next year. It might be one of those dual years for them once again. I don't know.
And look, maybe this is as simple as not the quality of the films, although I don't Lightyear wasn't great. It didn't get word of mouth, and people weren't going back to see that a second time, and that's part of it.
Yeah.
Elemental I really liked, but to the point I'm trying to make here, maybe it's simply bad marketing, and they need to reevaluate how they're going to market these movies. We're going full on to theaters. We're not going to make them available on Disney Plus for 6 months or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And make that clear.
Yeah.
You know, and hopefully that then incentivizes families to go to the theaters to see Inside Out. Oh, I liked that first one. Let's go and see the sequel.
Yeah.
And hopefully they get back to what they were doing pre-COVID.
I agree. I agree because I think they still have some great content under their belts that we haven't seen yet, and I'd like to see people recognize that.
Hey, Brendan, you want to talk about some coffee? I
Oh
love
yeah.
coffee.
Oh yeah. Anything to get me through this devastating Hollywood world we live in right now. That really helps me just stay awake and alert from the whole thing.
Yes, we have to stay awake and alert. And especially when you have two kids, coffee is your lifeline.
Oh,
you need it to survive. And that's where Coffee Cult comes in.
And it's not even just that; it's also a natural stress reliever.
I've
heard many people say. I mean, I agree. Just the smell of coffee, the aroma of it, is enough to calm you down. And apparently, there was a study that suggested that is absolutely the case. And I mean, with products like Coffee Cult and how beautifully crafted that they are, I mean, man, does that help even make that evidence, more factual, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I've had a few times where my son, who's 7, will smell the beans and tell me that he loves the smell of the coffee beans.
And kids are not supposed to like coffee.
Exactly. So it certainly speaks to the aroma of these beans and their potency.
Yeah.
So, and that's the great thing about Coffee Cult, because they source only specialty grade coffee from over 50 countries around the world.
Yep.
This is premium grade coffee.
Yep.
That is different. It's certainly a little pricier, but they are all about high quality. A lot of companies that we won't mention here, they will diminish the quality of their coffee by using either defected beans, or they'll throw in Robusta beans, which are lower grade beans. They're very bitter and not very great. They're packed with caffeine, but they taste like garbage. And
it's anything that'll let them last longer on whatever shelf life that they're given, right? It's all about that preservation, which tends to ruin most food items to begin with. And the same thing happens with coffee.
And you have to be careful with flavored coffees, because in order for those flavored coffees to be made, they use chemicals. So it's not great.
There's a real thing called artificial flavors, right? And we're people that enjoy the taste and the art of coffee making, right? That we want to understand the natural flavors that these specific beans are providing us.
Exactly. And Coffee Cult doesn't use any of that nonsense. They don't use chemicals. They don't use artificial flavors. They only roast specialty grade coffee beans. And that's the thing about specialty grade and roasting it in a way where those natural flavors can come through. Because, for example, one of my favorite coffees they had was the Ethiopian Harar.
Okay.
And I had a cup of that again today. And I'm not kidding when I say that drinking that coffee, it tastes like blueberries. Like a blueberry muffin. That's kind of what
that's the thing. Like a good coffee should almost seem like a dessert or something like that.
Exactly.
Like I love the Sumatra. That is probably my favorite one.
Great.
It's so good.
The Cumbris, the black honey Cumbris is absolutely fantastic. And look, like a lot of these coffees, they have like these fruity sweet notes to it that might render like a flavor, like an artificial flavoring, but it's not. Like they're just elite coffees. That's how great they are.
To the average listener, you might think we're talking about something like bourbon or something, but in some ways, the artfulness and how it's crafted, it's not too different with regard to Coffee Cult and certain, alcohols like that. I mean, not to say that that's what this is, but
craft, the art.
There's a mindfulness to that.
Yeah, it's kind of working within the same tones there.
Sure.
And the other thing about Coffee Cult, they only source coffee from farms that pay their workers fairly and equally, especially their women workers.
Yep. So it's very ethical.
Very ethically sourced. They roast to order, so there's the coffee's not just sitting around. Like it's not stored in some sort of warehouse. You order, it is roasted, it is shipped there. It gets to you in 2 days. especially if you're in the United States. It's extremely fresh and delicious. So go to coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K. Coffeecult.com. Use our code ISF and you'll get 15% off. That's code ISF, 15% off. Go and check them out. Again, that's coffeecult.com. The InSession Film Podcast is brought to you by our great friends over at First Time Watchers. Brennan, we are talking about cinema and how distressing it seems to be at the moment. However, what if you want a good time? First Time Watchers. That's where you go. They are anti-bleak.
Well, it's distressing knowing that they only have 5 more episodes until they call it quits. They will be closing up shop on episode 500. All of the great episodes will still be there for your listening pleasure, but there will be no more new episodes upcoming. But what content they have put out thus far, you're right, it's anything but bleak. In fact, it's very knowledgeable, a great supporter of our show, and definitely a movie podcast you have to check out. Hosted by Tim, Walter, and Hermano. And it's not bleak because they know their movies. Even when they don't agree with each other, they have a valid conversation as to why that is.
That's true. On their latest episode, they talked about the movie The Long Good Friday, along with DJ Valentine, friend of the show.
Yep.
And it was a really fun conversation. They also talked Transformers and The Flash. So it was rounded, certainly a nice variety of movies.
I mean, when you have someone like DJ Valentine, of course, you're going to talk about some of those quote unquote nerdier forms of entertainment, I guess. But I mean, that's the thing. They'll pick out movies that they've never seen, which is usually their bread and butter. That's usually what they like to focus on. But they'll also discuss other movies that they've caught up with, whether it be something like The Flash or Transformers, and maybe some new movie trailers that are worth noting. So it's very movie centric, but it's always fun seeing what movie they pick as their primary review, because most cases it's something we've never even heard of, which is always fun to see. Now this film that they've talked about here, I haven't seen, but I've at least heard of it. So it's a little more familiar, but they'll trick us every now and then. It's never consistent, which is what's so fun about their show.
Absolutely. They give out some great recommendations at the end of the show that I would urge you to pay attention to. And overall, this show is very smart. It's wonderful. It's almost ending, which is sad. Again, the melancholy of the show. But go check them out. Enjoy it while it is here. With that said, Brendan, where can you find them on the internet?
You can go to firsttimewatchers.podbean.com and also hit them up on Twitter at firsttimewatchers, and on Facebook, simply search First Time Watchers. Also on Instagram, you can find them there as well.
And go subscribe to them on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave them a review. Let them know how much you love and adore their show. At the end of your review, we ask that you leave a little hashtag so they know we sent you to them. And this week, let's go with the hashtag, The Long Goodbye.
That's sad. That's devastating. God, it better not be emblematic of the, the state of cinema.
I know. Could you imagine? Oh my gosh. Look,
that got morbid.
That got morbid real fast. We're going to try to make the rest of this conversation around cinema not quite that dire, but you never know. We might be in the long goodbye as we speak. Who knows? At any rate, go leave them that hashtag. Let them know how much you love them. Again, that's First Time Watchers. Okay, let's talk about superhero movies, Brendan, because The Flash did not do very well at the box office.
From what I understand, I hate using hyperbolic terms. You do as well, JD, right? But can we call this a box office disaster?
I think so. I mean, they hyped this movie up as the best superhero movie, if not ever, since The Dark Knight. That was the conversation.
Yeah.
And James Gunn was raving it. Tom Cruise, they even had Tom Cruise say something about it. And maybe a few other celebrities, that's slipping the mind here. But they hyped this movie up. And it's also interesting because, we talked about how Warner Brothers and Zaslav is just destroying everything with Warner Brothers. When he came on, one of the first huge things he did was write off the Batgirl movie. Nope, we're done. We're not. This movie is finished, but we're writing this off. And they could have done the same thing with The Flash, especially because they were bringing on James Gunn to reboot the DCEU. We're going to completely start fresh. We're going to have a Kevin Feige figure that can spearhead this campaign for us. And that's probably the right call. However, The Flash falls under the previous regime,
the DCEU, as it was called, as opposed to the new DCU, as I think it's to be called going forward.
But they didn't write it off. They said, we're going full steam into this.
Yeah.
So, and not only that, but they put some money behind it. They did market this movie. And I fully believe Warner Brothers thought they had something massive on their hands, perhaps historic. Not the case.
No, not at all.
And that's not. This isn't one of those situations where it didn't do well at the box office, but in time, history will be. No, I don't think history is going to be kind.
I don't think so. Well, and even so, like there's so much bad buzz around the production of this movie, most notably the issues regarding Ezra Miller and their troubles that they're now trying to seek help for. But that certainly did not help. So, I mean, The Flash is certainly a unique outlier in this in some ways because it had so much bad blood behind it. But then it's also the timing of it all. I think there's also a lot of reason to speculate that these same issues also permeated throughout Shazam 2 and Black Adam because we knew going into those movies that there was going to be a reset, right? That these movies didn't necessarily matter in the long run. And the movies that we saw, at least from our perspective, they felt like obligations. Like they felt like obligatory films. And I think people felt that as well, which is why they just didn't get the word of mouth to carry more box office momentum. And I think The Flash falls into that same category, just with more bad blood behind it, as we've been talking about. So there's definitely some circumstance there. It makes us question whether the announcement of this new James Gunn, Peter Safran-led DCU, if the timing of it was really the right call. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But I think that definitely plays a part of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of this conversation echoes what we just talked about with Pixar in the sense that we live in a post-COVID world now where things aren't the same as they were previously. Then you couple that with superhero fatigue. It's expensive to go to the theaters, everything that we talked about before. And the other hurdle for DC especially is the lack of quality and the lack of consistency. The one thing that Marvel has going for it is that they took their time, they built this universe. The movies have been varying forms of good. A few of them have even been great. They concluded Endgame on a really high note. So as they entered into phase 4, they had built up cachet. So even as fatigue had set in, we all went through COVID and everything that comes along with that. And you look at the box office numbers of phase 4, and Black Widow did the least at $379 million, which is pretty low for Marvel. Eternals right there, $402 million. Not terrible, not great, but certainly not as bad as something like The Flash. However, No Way Home, $1 billion. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, almost $1 billion. Thor: Love and Thunder, one of Marvel's worst, if you ask me. Still was around $800 million. Like it still did very well.
Yeah.
And Wakanda Forever did very well as well. And then Quantumania, it wasn't super great. Guardians, Volume 3 did very well though.
Yeah.
So despite the quality of Phase 4 and the beginning of Phase 5, and we can debate that. Yeah. I really liked Phase 4. I think there's potential with Phase 5, and we don't necessarily have to get into all those reasons right now. But
right.
In terms of box office and superhero fatigue, the one thing Marvel has for it is that built-in cachet. They had earned that cachet.
They have a foundation already.
They have a foundation. As we all know, this isn't news. This isn't a new idea. Warner Brothers and DC was like, we're way behind here. We're jumping the gun. And we're going right in. So Man of Steel comes out, which it does well. And then their next movie was Batman versus Superman.
Yeah.
So
Which sometimes I think they only made that movie just to have a great announcement for it at Hall H Comic-Con. Because I remember hearing the word of mouth of just how bonkers that day was when that announcement was made. And it built up a lot of hype. Of course, I don't think the film lives up to that hype. And I think a lot of people might agree. No, I don't know if a lot of people might agree. A lot of people are very, there are some people that love that movie. But I feel like they were, DC and Warner Brothers, they were trying to play the hype game as opposed to the movie game, which is what Marvel was at least doing.
Yeah.
And they were going backwards. They were very regressive in that regard. And that's unfortunate.
I agree. And because of how they were rushing, when you get to something like Justice League, not only are you having to bring all these characters together for this global catastrophe, the stakes are high, yada, yada, but in doing so, you have to, like, two of your characters are introduced in that film. So you're having to give us exposition and like an origin story for two of them in the middle of, that's something the Avengers movies never had to do. And
even when they did do it, it's all about how well you do it, right?
Yeah, execution.
Yeah, because like it's not an Avengers movie, but let's look at Captain America: Civil War, which in some ways is kind of Avengers 2.5, if you really want to think of it that way. But that introduced both Spider-Man and Black Panther without real like origin stories to define them. And yet I feel like by the end of Civil War, I started to get to know them enough to be compelled to see them more. Right?
Yeah.
There was an efficiency.
I agree.
There.
No, I agree. That's
that's what DC did not have.
I agree. Now, to be fair, Justice League was marred by tragedy.
That was a very troubled production. So
it was a troubled production. However, regardless of what happened to Zack Snyder, and my heart still goes out to him for sure.
Yeah.
But the idea on paper, I think is still very flawed. When you're introducing two characters and giving them origin stories in the Justice League movie, like he was up against the wall to begin with. And then with Zack Snyder's Justice League, now I think that's actually a pretty good movie on the whole. However, that's a 4-hour movie. Like that wouldn't have been released in theaters as it was.
No,
they would have, even if that was his vision, they still would have asked him to cut it to at least 3 hours, which means that all of the depth of that film in terms of introducing those characters, and I do think Cyborg and Zack Snyder's Justice League is actually kind of fascinating. Like, but all of that still would have been cut out in the theatrical cut.
Yeah.
So, like, the approach I just think is fundamentally flawed, and then the execution just wasn't there.
Agreed.
And so when you get to where we enter into COVID with Birds of Prey made $205 million still. That's a movie that I think without COVID probably
I think that would have done better. I think that could have been
well, to be
that
fair.
That would have been at least 500 million.
I agree.
Somewhere around that range.
I'm also curious about Wonder Woman 1984, and again, we can argue quality all day long, but that first movie
I still really like that movie.
The first one did well, that if it didn't come out in 2020, would that have done well financially more than it did? I think there's an argument to be made there, but still,
Yeah.
regardless, those haven't performed up to the standards of what we saw with Marvel. And then the Suicide Squad didn't do super great either. Again, quality. I'm not arguing quality. Black Adam was a huge failure. Shazam! Fury of the Gods did almost nothing as well at the box office, and then now with the Flash. And I think those three films are simply a result of people not responding to those films because the quality is just really bad.
It's that foundational support that it just doesn't have that we keep talking about. And like we alluded to, the knowledge that a lot of this is not going to matter, which is why of the remaining DC films that we have, at least this year before we kickstart James Gunn and Peter Safran's DCU, what do we have? We have, technically, it's just Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, right? Because from what I understand, Blue Beetle is the first character of the newly dubbed DCU. I don't think enough people know that, but I wouldn't be surprised if out of all of these DC movies that we've gotten over the past year or so, Blue Beetle is the one that ends up being the most financially successful. And I think it's
curious.
It's because it looks different. Like there's a difference to it. Like I have a hunch that regardless if it's a good movie or not, I love the first Aquaman. I think it's my favorite of the whole DCEU. I think that sequel, I think what comes out in December, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's going to fail financially. I just don't see it doing very well. Just given the history of what we're leading up to.
Yeah, I mean, you might be right. Blue Beetle, I think, is fascinating because it has the potential, and I'm not as familiar with DC as I am with Marvel, but I kind of wonder if it has the potential to be their Iron Man, right? Because Iron Man in 2008, like, he was not one of Marvel's most prominent, characters. Like, you go on the streets and you ask people then about Marvel, and it would have been Spider-Man, X-Men, Fantastic Four, Captain America. Like, those would have been the characters that they talked about. Iron Man was like in the B tier. He
wasn't for me. He was one I loved as a kid, but you're right.
Oh, I did too. But broadly speaking, he was more in that second tier.
Yeah.
And then it comes out, and is there anyone that is more of a face of the MCU than Tony Stark and Robert Downey Jr.?
No. Who would have expected that? I don't even think Marvel expected that. I mean, Marvel Studios came about because of the success of Iron Man.
Yeah. And so I say that to say that Blue Beetle might not be Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman or even Aquaman. People might not know the character. I certainly don't know much about the character. But maybe if it's done well and it's good, and then over the course of time, how they utilize that character, maybe it could have some sort of similar trajectory.
Yeah.
And that to me is the excitement of where James Gunn might be taking all of this. But
again,
they have to earn it, though. They have to build their way.
I trust James Gunn knows what he's doing to build it. I think the problem now is that they have all this baggage that needs to come out first in order to pave the way for what new things we're going to see. I mean, as we're recording this, we only now just saw the news of who has been cast as both Clark Kent and Lois Lane in Superman Legacy. Very good casting choices, I might add. I think they seem very well cast. I'm excited to see what they're going to do with their respective roles. But once the baggage is gone, I feel like is when we can literally wipe that slate clean and start anew. We've just got these obligations to clear the way for it. But I think people are recognizing that, which is why these movies haven't been doing very well, because they know that they're just obligations.
Yeah. And that leads me to my next point. And I sent out a tweet about this last week, and I got some pushback about it as far as quality. Like, I'm of the mindset of make good movies. Make good movies, and people will go and see them. Now, it's of course not that black and white. There are so many factors at play. I recognize that. We've talked a lot about them. And because of the comfortability of being at home on your couch, comfortably in your sweatpants and your 90-inch TV and your surround sound, maybe you'd rather watch The Flash in that way, or the new Mission Impossible, or whatever the movie is.
Oh,
Maybe that's how you prefer it. So I understand that there are factors at play. However, I think quality in a post-COVID world matters more now than it ever did before.
Oh, I agree.
Now,
I mean, look at Top Gun Maverick.
That's one of the examples that I was going to bring up. Top Gun Maverick makes $1.5 billion. Now, Top Gun is a beloved movie, I would say, but we're talking about a sequel to a movie from 1986.
Yeah.
That film had no right to make $1.5 billion. But the reason it does is because it's really good, it's emotionally involved, and people went to see it more than once because of that.
Yeah.
That's how you get to 1.5 billion.
This is how we have to do this analysis, right? Is that it's so hard to do because it's you can't tell who's seeing movies multiple times, right? There's just no way to track that kind of detail in that granular of a way. But in the case of movies like Top Gun Maverick, you could potentially see this like growing escalation in box office numbers as the weeks go on, and not just in its infancy, right? And that's where the word of mouth becomes very important in leading to good box office results. Like, let's say we go back to something like The Flash, for instance, which we've called a box office disaster. I don't think that's a hyperbole. The movie is doing terrible numbers at the box office. But let's say, hypothetically, the hype that movie was getting about it being the quote-unquote greatest superhero movie ever made, let's say that those were true, and most people felt that way about the movie. Would the numbers be different? And I kind of think they would.
I think now, when you consider, again, not just home theater comfortability, but the cost of going to the theater.
Yeah.
And
it has to feel like there's this event that we're going to the movies for.
Yeah. I mean, people are saving their money. It's simply why there isn't as many comedies anymore, which is why I'm really hoping the Jennifer Lawrence movie does well, because we don't get R-rated comedies in theaters anymore. Those go straight to Netflix these days. If you're not a horror film, if you're not a superhero movie, the chances of you going to theaters are getting slimmer and slimmer.
Yeah.
The $50 million adult drama just doesn't exist anymore. Unless a Scorsese is funding it and producing it or directing it, or Quentin unless you're a significant name, it's really hard to get those movies into theaters. Yeah. It is these big IP movies, that people are saving their money up for. And so, when it comes to getting people into the movie, like there's such a competition factor when you consider not just the streaming, not just the at-home stuff, but everything that comes with the technology we have now. Everything is demanding your attention at every second.
Yeah.
That to get people in the theaters, it has to be some sort of quote unquote event.
Yeah.
And that's why I think quality will matter now more than ever, because it will get people excited for these movies. And then the word of mouth, I do think, is again more important now in a post-COVID world than it ever was previously.
Yep.
Because to your point, if The Flash was great, if it genuinely lived up to the hype, people would have seen it. They would have raved about it. They would have told their friends, and the people that were on the fence would have gone to see that movie and maybe saw it multiple times. Yeah. And then that's how you get to $1 billion. Now, I just think everything post-COVID is so different than it was before that I don't think we can compare what going to the movies is now to what it was in 2019, which is why, for me, the notion of just make good movies and people will show up, I know there's nuance to it, but I think that matters so much right now. And Top Gun Maverick has proven this. Avatar: The Way of Water has proven this. Hell, even if we want to go to the world of DC, the Batman proved that, right? That made almost $800 million worldwide, which blew everything DCEU out of the water
and
in the same time frame.
I hate to keep making these comparisons because there is this consistent narrative among film critics about what blockbuster filmmaking used to be as opposed to what it is now. But let's look at the early to mid 2000s, right? A very different time, but we've often talked about that was a time when filmmakers were given the reins to make blockbusters and still make their own movies, right? And that's why movies like, let's say, Spider-Man or Spider-Man 2 or Pirates of the Caribbean or some of those Harry Potter films, The Lord of the Rings and whatnot, they felt like events. Now, not all movies have to do that, but there was a very different approach to movie making that went into blockbuster filmmaking, that it was still, it was this balance between commercial business and art. Like they were working congruently. It was a parallel business model. Now it's perpendicular. And that's, maybe that's inherently the problem, that it starts to create this sense of repetition when you notice one way over the other. And that's kind of a sad notion too, because if a lot of these movies were looking back at how blockbusters used to be made, I think there could be more of a sense of excitement for them, even if you don't know why you should be excited for them. You're right. Just make good movies. People will talk about them then.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of this comes down to, at least now. And again, it's not mutually exclusive.
No,
because you have something like Jurassic World Dominion make $1 billion, and that's not the greatest of movies. So look, these average movies, these below average, not very good IP blockbusters, look, some of them will trickle in, but that comes from a franchise where people have always shown up to see those movies.
Yep.
So it has that built-in fan base. But even if you look at something like Fast X, for example, and perhaps this plays into the fatigue we talked about earlier and all these other exterior factors. So far, that movie has made $689 million worldwide, comparatively to Fast 9, which did 750. And then you look at Fast, The Fate of the Furious, so the eighth movie, which did 1.2 billion. So again,
there's definitely diminishing returns.
There's diminishing returns. And part of that, I think, is the quality since 7 hasn't quite been there, and we're now seeing the effects of that. You know, whereas you look at something like John Wick 4. So John Wick 3, for context, that did 327 million, and that was 2019, so that's pre-COVID.
Yeah.
John Wick 4 did 427 million worldwide.
Yeah.
So
it's also a much longer movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Nearly 3-hour movie too. Let's put that in perspective.
So yeah, exactly. So and that film does well because of quality. It's good, and people went to see it. They told their friends, and so those that are invested in that franchise or in that kind of movie, they certainly went to see it. So you do see that, like, the trajectory of that has gone upwards.
Yeah.
And is it a coincidence that those films are well made? I don't know, but it's interesting to see that, and especially with Avatar and Top Gun Maverick.
Yeah.
And again, I understand that there's variances here, there are shades of gray and all of this. But the films at the tip of the spear that are doing gangbusters at the box office post-COVID, that is very important. I'm not talking about anything pre-COVID, but everything post-COVID, it all comes down to quality and being distinctive, and it's not CGI soup. Like those kind of movies, even my beloved Transformers. I love the Transformers franchise. We talked about this when we did our Transformers review here on the show. Like, as much as I enjoyed Rise of the Beast, visually speaking, quality-wise, like, say what you will about Michael Bay, but those films have a tangibility to them. Like, there's like there's something about them that feels lived in And I think the animation and the CGI is honestly still very good. It's a little clunkier, but it's cleaner.
Clunky, but,
like
but there's at least
sharp.
there's a vibrancy at least.
Yeah.
Like you could definitely sense that there's an attempt to put into the saturation to at least enlighten some of the color palettes and make it kind of lush and vivid where it needs to be.
Exactly. And we just don't like. I want the new Transformers to do well, but I understand why it hasn't garnered the response that it has. And, if some of this is also on Michael Bay because those last two Transformers movies were not very good. And so similarly to DC, I think people have become tired of Transformers and they're not nearly as invested in that franchise anymore.
And sadly, Bumblebee wasn't enough to bring them back in.
No, and that's where, again, there's various shades of gray here because that's a good movie that mostly got good reviews. People tend to really like it. The word of mouth, though, wasn't nearly as strong. People didn't really quite go to see it. So, look, it's not, it's not black and white. But
right.
Generally speaking, I think especially now, and Bumblebee was pre-COVID. So again, I think that is somewhat excluded from this conversation.
Right.
I kind of wonder how that film would do now, honestly, in a post-COVID world.
Yeah.
But
that's a good point. Be curious.
Now, make good movies, people will go.
And
unless it's horror, then it's a different story.
Well, I mean, horror tends to always make its money back because they're always made on the cheap anyway.
People love you
can do whatever you want with that genre, but just make good movies. Honestly, just selfishly speaking, we just want to see good movies. So
that's it too. That's the funny thing about the pushback more than anything else is like,
people need to debate on film Twitter, right? I mean, it's like you can agree with a point, but you got to find some little thing that you can push back on just for the sake of being confrontational because it's just easy to do that in an online forum, and that's. That's
I'm not calling anyone out specifically. I just think it's funny that my whole thing was make good movies, people will show up, and I was getting pushback to go, nah, that's not it. That's not good enough. It's like I just want there to be good movies. Like just do it.
And and I don't just say it as the royal we. I'm saying you and I just want to see good movies, and we want to be surprised and blown away by something that feels like it could be an event. That's what we go to the movies for. That sensation, that otherworldly aspect that they can bring out.
I agree. Looking at the box office here, though, Brennan, I want to somewhat flip the script here a little bit. I want to go back to animation here for a quick moment because earlier with Pixar, we were talking about marketing. The Super Mario Brothers movie has done $1.3 billion worldwide.
It's the highest grossing animated movie of all time, right?
Yes.
Or no, not of all time. It is certainly, I think it's in the top 3 right now. Again,
close.
Listeners, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know it's up there pretty highly, at least in the top 5 of all time.
So, and obviously with Elemental coming out this year, like coming out in the same year, like it to me, that is, it reverberates that there's really no excuse from Disney and Pixar. And I think a lot of this comes down to, and it's hard to compare. This is not apples to apples because Elemental isn't relying on IP.
No.
If anything, it's reliant on a certain Pixar mentality, but the Super Mario Brothers has tons of nostalgia behind it. However, I will say this, even if you remove the nostalgia, the marketing for that film was way better than what we've seen from Pixar recently.
That's the thing. It's a different audience for one thing, between Illumination and Pixar specifically.
Oh, for
right?
sure.
But say what you will about Illumination. I don't love many of their movies, okay? But they know how to market the shit out of their movies because they know exactly who they're targeting and they target them well. And those are younger kids. These are young kids that they are feeding into the mindset of, and I have to give them credit for doing that very well. Like they may not make the best quality movies in my opinion, but I think there's some of the best movie marketers in the animated world nowadays. They know how to target. They do a really good job at it.
Well, and that's the thing with the Minions movies and Super Mario Brothers.
Secret Life of Pets were also that was a big hit too, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely. And you're right that they know what their audience is, and the movies themselves are mindful of that as well, because those movies, and quality wise, it's certainly why I adore Pixar more, because the Illumination movies are pretty formulaic and a bit childish, but that's why families love them.
Yeah.
Where Pixar, like Elemental, is this mature allegory about immigration. Look, my 7-year-old could not comprehend that, let alone even younger kids than that, who can go into Super Mario Brothers movie and love that. Like, and my son saw that as well and loved it. Like, he loved Super Mario Brothers. So, and he likes a lot of the Minions movies as well. So, like, those movies, say what you will about them, they know who they're making this for, and they're not trying to be Pixar. And they certainly deserve credit for that.
Yeah,
and,
they do.
And to your point, they know how to market those movies accordingly.
They do. Yeah.
And look, I love that Pixar isn't trying to lower their threshold in terms of their
they're not
artistic
pandering
values.
to a different audience because they know there might be more money in it. But that's the thing. If you know what your audience is and you know what that mindset is, it changes how you market that specific film to that audience. And I think, if anything, if we want to try and broaden this observation, Pixar, I think, just hasn't done as good of a job at that type of, outbound marketing, that type of targeting that Illumination is very good at. It'd be a very different strategy, but it's how you go about feeding into that specific mindset and that audience, which I think Pixar has just been kind of hit or miss on.
I agree. No, I very much agree. Before we transition, do you have any other thoughts on the current state of cinema as it is?
July, I think it's in July. Don't we see another Criterion sale of Barnes & Noble coming up? So if there's any message here, buy physical media, buy Criterion. They have some pretty good movies, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, no, and that's another interesting thing about where we are right now. And I don't know what the future is in terms of, not just awards movies, but like these small indies. Like earlier this year, I thought it was promising that I had to go see Showing Up in a theater.
Yeah.
It was exciting. I got to see Asteroid City and Past Lives in a theater. I don't, with the box office the way that it is, with superhero movies, even, not doing well, Pixar not doing well. I don't think theaters are going away anytime soon. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to make this like the bleakest point I've ever made here on the show.
No.
But I am curious what the next few years are going to look like. Is it simply, an indication that there's superhero fatigue and these movies aren't very good and people just don't care anymore? I'm hoping it's more that. I'm hoping that it's just Pixar, being a
Just
victim
segmented
of
to these, to either this subgenre or this studio or something.
Yeah, or Pixar being a victim of Lucas' success.
Yeah.
And people being conditioned to watching things at home. I guess I'm hoping it's that, and hoping that maybe we can burst out of that bubble a little bit, because like watching a midnight special in theaters, like that was a small movie in 2016. And like, I remember
that was like a religious experience for you, wasn't it?
Absolutely, like this religious, spiritual experience. Like I would love to have more of those experiences. Not that I can't have them at home. I certainly have, but there's something about going to the theater that, I guess if we're going to keep this on religion, like it is my church. It
kind of is, yeah.
Like that's kind of where I go to.
And there's nothing And there's nothing like seeing a new movie for the first time in that setting, and it blows you away. Like, let's say a Midnight Special or First Man did for you, or like a Petite Maman did for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like the Tale of the Princess Kaguya, when I saw that back in 2014, and I was like, this is one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. Not to say that every year needs a movie of that caliber to do that to you, but every year there are movies that at least come close, that move you in a new and invigorating way that still respects and appreciates the art itself and the preservation of it. That's the church aspect that we always talk about with this.
For sure. Which is to say, going back to just make good movies.
Yeah.
Hopefully, through like the Past Lives and the Asteroid Cities and, the Midnight Specials of the world, hopefully we'll be able to kind of, keep those in theaters moving forward. Because I certainly want to be able to have those experiences. I just don't want it to become IP. Yeah. And who knows, maybe the failures of a lot of these IP films we've seen recently, maybe it'll give way for some of these lower tier budget movies to kind of make their way in.
One can only hope that maybe there is a positive ripple effect that could occur from all of this. I don't know if it were to happen. It still seems too soon to tell, but maybe we can look back on this and think, oh man, all those complaints that we had about these movies and these big budget movies not being very good and doing terrible numbers, aren't you glad that that happened to lead to maybe it'll be one of those conversations we have in, I don't know, 10 years or so.
Yeah. I agree. The last thought I have on this, and then we can transition here. As much as I have enjoyed the Marvel machine, and I'm looking forward to what James Gunn might have up his sleeve, I would love to get back to a world where there's a little bit more priority on art and not executives, with greed in their eyes, just kind of strumming their fingers and asking these things to be out, every single year because, I mentioned Michael Bay earlier and his visual eye, or even something like, of course there's like Lord of the Rings as another great example, or how about Pirates of the Caribbean?
Yeah, like brought that up
too.
The
practical and even the CGI, the CGI of those films, and we're talking about 20 years ago now, and the CGI of those films looks
better than anything today.
Better. Yes, because
Davy Jones is one of the greatest digital creations I have ever seen put to screen.
I agree. And how often do we hear the visual artists, that are working in Hollywood, talking about how they are being worked to death because of all these superhero movies? Like, I thought that first Iron Man actually looked really good. They took their time with that.
The majority of phase 1, I think, looks amazing.
It looks really good. Like, you can certainly tell, like, phase 1, phase 2, like, they were taking their time, and it's not until like these like recent years where it's become CGI soup. Same thing with DC and even outside of superhero movies, just a lot of blockbusters we get to these days. Transformers, Rise of the Beast, I mentioned, like, all of them fall into these flat visuals that are insipid, and
it's because they're probably working on all these same movies. Yes. They work for these companies that are contracted by these studios to work on their respective films, and if they're double dipping like this all the time, at the rate that these movies are coming out, they just can't balance that workload.
They can't, and I would like to kind of get back to, the way things looked with like Pirates of the Caribbean, for example, which is why I admire James Cameron coming out and going, you know what? We're pushing all of these movies back 3 years.
Yeah. Yep.
Avatar 5 is coming out in 2031.
That's incredible. That's insane. Oh my gosh.
Could you, like, I can't even imagine, like, in 2031 doing a press tour for something you filmed 14 years ago.
That is oh my God, that's almost our ages right now between the first Avatar and Avatar 5 then.
Yeah.
That's
Wild.
insane. That's I mean, well, it's younger than us. Now we're in our 30s, but that's what 2009 to 2031. That's 22 years. So
Yeah.
it's
It's insane.
it's a full
And-
that's a full youthful lifetime. It's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah, and I respect that Goat Cameron is like, look, I need time to get this right. And he delivers. He certainly delivers. And no one batted an eye when that came out, other than it was like, okay, this is funny, but everyone's like, let him cook.
We trust Cameron. We talk about Illumination knowing how to market their movies. Cameron knows how to market a movie. Like I don't know how he does it or what his strategy is, but somehow his movies just feed into the mindset of people who like going to the movies and are curious, and they're going to see his work regardless if it's like 17 hours long. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I agree. And look, I'm still looking forward to what Marvel and DC and all these other, if they continue Transformers, a film isn't entirely predicated on its visuals. It can still have great characters and performances and thematic nuances to it that's still really great. But it is a visual medium. You can't completely separate the craft, the artistic visual craft from what we're seeing on screen. And, Maverick and The Batman, The Way of Water, like all of these films are indicative of what you can do to, take cinema to a new level. And people right now, post-COVID, are responding to that.
They are. Yeah.
So I guess essentially that's my main point, what I was trying to get at earlier.
I think that's fair.
All right, let's talk about, as we wind down here, Paul Thomas Anderson.
Yeah, good filmmaker.
He recently celebrated a birthday, and people were talking about their favorite Paul Thomas Anderson films.
Yeah.
So, in honor of his birthday, I thought it would be fun to kind of end the show here by doing a Paul Thomas Anderson ranking.
Yeah.
Talking about our rankings of PTA.
Yeah, I think this is fun. It's fun because every time I open up my ranking of his films on Letterboxd, I feel like, wait, I think I need to change this. I think I need to change something. There's always something There's one movie in particular that is always fluctuating on my list.
Okay.
And if we're on that topic, I'll go ahead and say it right now. It's Magnolia.
Oh yeah, I saw a lot of conversation about this on social media.
Yeah, like right now I have Magnolia somewhere around 3rd or 4th place, but there are other days I have it as low as 7 or 8. I tend to prefer the later era of Paul Thomas Anderson as opposed to his earlier films. I'd say like Punch Drunk Love onward is my favorite era of PTA because I feel like that's when he was kind of shedding his Robert Altman and Martin Scorsese influences a bit to do something a bit more unique to him. And that's certainly more evident in his later films. And Magnolia just reeks of Robert Altman shortcuts. I mean, it absolutely does. But that was a formative film for me. At one point in my life, in early college, it was my favorite movie of all time. It was one of those movies for me. So I'm always going to have a soft spot for it, even if I recognize that it still carries a lot of other filmmakers' DNAs as opposed to just PTA's DNA. But that one, it always fluctuates. I love the movie. I'll always love the movie, but it's interesting to see a filmmaker whose filmography is as ever-changing as it is. I think that's the sign of a great filmmaker, is when those films are always evolving with your own mindset as you grow, and I think he's certainly one of them.
Yeah, so I have Magnolia on Letterboxd. I have it rated at 4.5 stars. Okay. It's number 7 on my list.
And that's out of 9. Oh, well, how many are you ranking? Are you ranking his 9 feature films, or are you including his documentary, Junun, I think it's called?
I do have that in here, but I have that last, so we can disregard it if we need to.
Okay.
But yeah, of his features, I still have it at 7. But to reiterate, I have it at 4.5 stars, and it's still one of my favorite films of '99. So
same. Let's start from the bottom up. I'm curious. What do you have at last place, just to get some of these out of the way?
I have Heart 8 at number 9.
All right. I have Hard 8 at a Hard 8.
At a hard
Out
8.
of 9.
I have
yeah.
Boogie Nights at 8 for me.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Boogie Nights is my 9, actually. And I know a lot of people love that one, and we'll put that one even
I really like
higher.
that one a lot too.
I like it a lot too, but that's that one I really sense the Martin Scorsese influence in. Like I see so much of Goodfellas and Casino in that movie, and
that's fair.
It's a little distracting at times. Like the whole opening shot of Boogie Nights, as well crafted as it is, it's so reminiscent of the Coco Cabana sequence from Goodfellas that I just can't help but be a little frustrated by it. So like I mean, all filmmakers have their influences, right? They always wear them on their sleeves, especially when they're getting started. You know, it's kind of how you find your own voice. So I'm glad PTA made these movies, even if I don't necessarily think they're some of his best and most original films. But I'm glad they exist as they do to lead to other films in his filmography later on that I absolutely adore. And we'll talk about those too.
Well, and that's the thing about imitation, you know, because we'll sort of get into this with the Indiana Jones thing, with Dial of Destiny. Look, imitation, I can understand why or how that can be distracting. However, when you do it like PTA does with Boogie Nights, like that is imitation at its best.
Well, yeah,
it's really
imitation.
Well done still.
It's imitation, but it at least has its own emotional ethos that feels like its own thing. Like when I see these characters interact like a family, there is this own PTA's channeling his own emotional voice that feels like something new. Really, if anything, it's the aesthetics that he's more or less copying from other filmmakers.
But I think he does a really great job in that mimicry, and the performances are very good. Like it's still very entertaining. Like that's just a really well crafted film, even if it's not as original or it doesn't have the thumbprint of PTA as we know him to be post Magnolia. I mean, it's a still really good movie. Even if it's
still really good. Yeah.
Heavily influenced.
Yeah,
you know?
Boogie Nights is, I mean, it's my least favorite PTA film, and even that one I would put no less than maybe 3 out of 5 or 3.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd, which is where I currently have it rated from a star rating standpoint. But that's still that's a solid 7 out of 10. That's a good movie. That's a very good movie right there. I just don't love it as much as maybe the acclaim seems to suggest. I much prefer his later output with regard to movies like really Punch Drunk Love Onward was this really interesting phase of his career when he really found his own unique voice that honestly I can't even put into words. And I think that's what I love so much about him. So many great filmmakers you can sort of describe in some way. Like you could talk about what choices they make as a director, as a storyteller, as an emotional storyteller as well, what they like to do thematically. You can find a definition for them. But PTA is not really that. You could sense certain things that are comparable, but it's always exciting seeing a new film of his because it's almost like he's trying to reinvent himself every time. I mean, I love
when you look at these films, I mean, each one is so distinct from the other. He just, that to me is what I love about PTA. And, whether it be tone or otherwise, visuals, I mean, they're all so distinctly different. Like The Master is nothing like Punch Drunk Love, which is nothing like Phantom Thread, which is nothing like Inherent Vice.
No,
they're just
and yet you watch these movies back to back. Something about the way the camera moves, something about the way that everything is methodically told, the precision of it all. It's like they feel like they came from the same mind. Again, it's hard to explain. It kind of falls into that same Stanley Kubrick kind of thing where it's like these feel so different, yet they don't. But I love that. It's so fascinating.
I agree. Okay, so we agree on 8 and 9, just the order's different.
Right.
So what do you have at 6 and 7?
6 and 7. Number 6 is Inherent Vice. Number 7 is Licorice Pizza.
Okay. I have, and again, let me be crystal clear about this. My 4, 5, 6, and 7 can be pretty interchangeable depending on the mood I'm in and what
Same.
I've recently watched.
Yeah, I was going to say what's most fresh in your mind is going to rank higher, I guess.
Yeah. So, take this with a grain of salt. Like that my 4, 5, 6, and 7, flip a coin with them. But here's where I'm at right now. Number 6 is Phantom Thread, and 7 I mentioned is Magnolia.
Yeah.
I'll just mention my 4 and 5 since I grouped them together.
Okay.
At 5, I have Licorice Pizza, and at 4, I have Inherent Vice. And which I think partially why I haven't ranked that high is because I think it's as good as anything PTA has done, and no one will champion that film except me and maybe a few
I
others.
will.
I know you will
it.
too.
Yeah.
Yes, I should include we.
I have it ranked at number 6, which is lower than you, but if I'm basing this list just based on, pure rewatchability, I might put Inherent Vice higher than I have it. My number 4 and 5, just to keep this conversation going in this way, my number 4 is Magnolia, and my number 5 is Phantom Thread. Phantom Thread I have ranked as highly as I do because it's one of those movies.
Great.
It's great, but it's one of his best crafted movies. I think just from a visual and artful standpoint, it is one of his best works ever. And I don't think he'll ever top it in that way, but it's also a movie that feels like a different movie every time I watch it. It's a movie that gets progressively funnier every time I watch it. And I'm starting to see it as like this quasi ghostly rom-com of sorts. But I don't always feel the urge to revisit it as much as, let's say, Inherent Vice, for instance.
Yeah, I agree. And if I'm looking at this more objectively and removing myself from the equation, Phantom Thread would probably be 3 on this list for me.
Yeah, I push it up higher too.
But and there's another film that I'll mention earlier, but Inherent Vice is one of those that doesn't get nearly as much love as it should, and I think it's just as good as Phantom Thread or Licorice Pizza.
That movie is so funny.
It's hilarious, so funny. And I think it has way more on its mind than it's given credit for. I love the 70s aesthetics of it.
Yeah,
the interesting colors and shadowing of it I think is fascinating, and just the characters are a wild trip. And so that's the film I want to champion that one because not many others will. And so that's why I think I have that at number 4. Maybe
I think that's fair. I think it's a very good film. It's certainly one of my favorite films of 2014 when that came out. I think it was in both of our updated top 10 lists for that year.
Yeah. Okay. So in the top 3, There Will Be Blood will be number 1 for most people. I assume that's the case for you.
It's number 2 for me.
Number 2. Oh, you have Punch Drunk Love at number 1.
That is my favorite.
Yeah, I think you mentioned
PTA.
that earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have that at number 2. So we agree on that. So,
yeah. But I mean, regardless, it sounds like we have the same top 3, just in a different order.
Yeah. So I have The Master at number 1. That to me is, I forget where I had that ranked, but it was in my top 10 of the decade. Of the 2010s.
I had it as my favorite movie of the decade.
you have it at number 1.
Yeah, and yet it's my number 3 PTA film. Now you might think, wait a minute,
hilarious.
but the other 2 came out in a different decade, so it doesn't conflict with The Master being the lead of its own decade. So, I mean, basically, anytime we do an exercise of the best of the decade, number 1 is probably going to be a PTA film. That's just what we've kind of accepted at this point.
That might be something that we have to plan next year because our retrospective this year is 2001.
Yes.
Which means we'll get to 2000 next year. And that means we've covered that decade.
Yeah, I think we'll have to do them both in the same episode. We'll have to do a 2000 retrospective, or maybe just 1 week later. We got to do we got to do a full decade look back on the year 2000, or that specific decade in particular.
Because our best of the decade episode we did for the 2010s was a lot of fun. I loved it. I thought that was great. So I'd love to replicate that for the 2000s.
Yeah.
So perhaps we can get into that next year. We're getting very close, but
that's gonna be hard to do, man.
oh my gosh, it always is.
Well, but, I mean, I feel like that decade in particular, I think is gonna be so much harder because so many of these movies that we saw at that time were formative films for us. So we have more of a we have more of a nostalgic soft spot for that era.
That's true,
and that makes it certainly more fun, more passionate, but more challenging as well.
For sure. Yeah, because like I know you've talked about There Will Be Blood in that sense for you, among others, like the Royal Tenenbaums, which we'll get to later this year. Like that's one of those for me. So
I also mentioned one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time being another 2001 film, and that's Spielberg's AI.
AI. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's one of my favorite conversations we had on the show last year. So.
Yeah. Wasn't 2001 also the year of Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love? I mean, it's like we're talking about some of our all-time favorite movies now. It's like,
and there's some great stuff. I look forward to getting into that retrospective here in a little bit. Anyway, circling back to PTA. So I have The Master at 1, Punch Drunk Love at 2, and There Will Be Blood at 3. That's my 3.
But all 3, I'd say, and hopefully you agree with this, 5 out of 5 star movies on Letterboxd, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolute masterpieces. All 5.
Yep. Absolutely. all 9. It's
all 9 masterpieces.
I mean, I don't quite think that, but I mean, the day that PTA makes a bad movie, I think the world might end. Like something bad's going to happen.
At least like collectively, like I know some people will argue Inherent Vice, and we had those like Licorice Pizza, but like on the whole, like these are very well loved and praised movies. So to your point, the moment that he has a movie that's like 39 on Rotten Tomatoes, that's pigs are flying. You know,
I mean, I will say I'd be weirdly excited to see it. I might even be more excited to see a movie that's panned by PTA. It's
So looking forward to that. Before we wind down here, one more quick thing. You know, we recently did our Asteroid City review.
Okay, so from one Anderson to another, I see what we're doing here.
You know, I wanted to quickly talk about Wes Anderson. Because at the end of that review, and even throughout, I noted a couple times that I wasn't sure where this ranked for me within Wes's filmography. And some of our listeners right now, or if you're watching this on YouTube, perhaps you missed that conversation altogether. So I wanted to bring it up here as well to do a Wes Anderson ranking real fast as well. With Asteroid City still top of mind for people. So let's do that real quick because I did update my list on Letterboxd.
Okay.
I did do it.
Okay.
Here's what I have. Okay. Do you want to go backwards or start at number 1?
Why don't we start at number 1? We're rounding down in the end here. Maybe this will go faster then. And plus, I already mostly revealed what my ranking was when we did our review of Asteroid City, and I can tell you right now it hasn't changed for me. I still stand by what I said there.
Okay. Well, again, for those that missed it, we'll reiterate it here.
Exactly.
I have The Royal Tenenbaums at number 1. Shocking. I just talked about how it was a formative movie for me.
Yep.
Imagine if I had that at 4.
I would say, who the hell are you? What have you done with J.D. Duran?
All right, so Royal all-time movie. That's in my top 50 all-time.
Yeah.
Number 2, Fantastic Mr. Fox. Love going down the foxhole. Number 3, Grand Budapest. Number 4, Moonrise Kingdom.
Okay.
At 5, AC, baby. Asteroid City.
Atlantic City. That's your
Atlantic City. That was the Wes Anderson. See, people don't know this, but Wes Anderson took a page from the Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse playbook, and he released various iterations of his movies in the theaters.
Okay.
So there's Asteroid City, and there's also Atlantic City. There's 2 versions. It just depends which one you go to.
That'd be a clever trick of his. Okay. Okay.
He could be the one to pull that off, though.
All right. So Asteroid City's in your top 5 of his 11 films.
Yeah.
All right.
And,
cool.
And then at 6, I have French Dispatch, 7, Rushmore, 8, Isle of Dogs, 9, Life Aquatic, 10, Bottle Rocket, and 11, Darjeeling Limited.
Well, it's interesting. We just got done talking about one Anderson. Now we're transitioning to another Anderson, and in both cases, JD and I have the same top three, just in different orders.
All right.
With Andersons, we think a lot alike, apparently. But yeah, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Grand Budapest Hotel, and Royal Tenenbaums are my numbers 1 through 3, respectively. I don't know if that'll ever change. I could see myself liking Royal Tenenbaums more with time. And I already love that movie. It's my number 3 out of these 11. Sure. But there's something about Fantastic Mr. Fox and just the overall stop motion aesthetic that I think fits dangerously well with Wes Anderson that I don't know if that'll be topped. Fantastic Mr. Fox, I think, might hold as my favorite Wes Anderson movie. And it's also why I love Isle of Dogs. That's my number 4. And my number 5 and 6 are the most interchangeable. I certainly like Life Aquatic more than you do. And a lot of that is because I think it just so beautifully sticks the landing. But I do think Asteroid City is a more compelling and interesting and well-crafted and more thoughtful movie. I think it's a more consistent movie. That's my number 6 right now, but I could easily see that moving up to number 5 as time goes on. So that's what I have there. Rushmore's my number 7. Darjeeling Limited I have at number 8. French Dispatch number 9, Moonrise Kingdom number 10, and Bottle Rockets I have at number 11.
Okay, there we are. After the top 3, it was we were a little bit. Oh, there's some disparity there.
Maybe a little bit. Maybe a little bit. But I think it's mostly just given how much you love Royal Tenenbaums, and it's more of a personal film for you as opposed to maybe me, and because it wasn't as formative for me. But at the same time, I do selfishly kind of miss that Wes Anderson when he still had this like emotional practicality to his films. And I'm not saying I want him to go back to that, but it was a very different time and place for him. And I love that existed. I agree. It made for some really interesting stuff, especially with regard to Royal Tenenbaums. I think that's secretly a very devastating and beautiful movie.
Oh, I agree, and I think that's what I loved so much about Asteroid City in terms of the emotion of it, the melancholy of it, and then as we talked about, there's the experimentation element of that film that I think is absolutely captivating.
For sure.
I think that's also why I loved The French Dispatch too. So, I'm loving this new era of Wes. That's for sure.
Sad Wes Anderson's good Wes Anderson.
I agree. Experimental Wes Anderson, I think, is really fun. Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
So take that, AI.
We didn't even talk about the topic of AI. I mean, I don't think we need to. That's too devastating.
We've already ended
on a positive note. I think that's a nice way to conclude things here.
Yeah, we'll wind down here. Just want to say a thank you to all of our patrons. You can sign up at patreon.com/InSessionFilm. It's a really great way to support the show. And thank you to all of our patrons who are helping us out there.
Yeah.
Next week on the show, I believe we are doing best of the year so far.
Mid-year report, baby.
Mid-year report.
That's what we're doing. I think it's the right time to do that.
Absolutely. We will have reviews for past lives coming soon as well. And a little movie called Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Still don't like that title, but I'm looking forward to the movie.
So we'll do a podcast review of that. I have a video review of that up right now on our YouTube channel if you want to go and check that out.
And I think there'll be good compliments of one another, because when you and I get together to talk about Indiana Jones, I think something tells me we'll have to do like a very quick retrospective on the 4 films leading up to it. So it'll be a much longer and denser conversation than what you laid out there with your video review already.
And even with Dial alone, there are things about it I didn't have time to get into. That we'll certainly get into with the podcast discussion. Also, just want to reiterate that we have a review of Asteroid City that came out earlier this week, so you can go and check that out. And then, in case you missed it, we also have reviews of The Flash and Elemental. Those are available as well, so be sure to go and check all that out. Our latest Women in Session podcast was really great. Kristen and Amy were joined by our own Dave Giannini, editor-in-chief.
How about
at
that?
InSessionFilm.com. They talked about The Adventures of Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. Fun conversation. Really, really enjoyable. Definitely urge people to go and check that out. Be sure to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We would love to interact with all of you there. Leave us reviews on Apple Podcasts, Spotify as well. All of that is very helpful. And if you're watching on the YouTubes, be sure to subscribe, like, and all that sort of fun jazz. So,
Absolutely.
Brennan, anything else before we get out of here?
Well, let's hope that The Dead Reckoning is what's going to save cinema for this summer. We see a lot of our friends and fellow critics are seeing it right now as we're recording this.
I could have seen it tonight, but I would have had
now
to go
I feel
all the
guilty.
way to Miami.
Now I feel guilty.
No. I would have had to go to Miami to see it, and
Okay.
with 2 children, that is a lot more cumbersome than it used to be. And they're doing another screening next week that's much closer to me. So
okay, well then might as well wait it
gonna
out.
Catch, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely gonna do that. But yes, to your point.
I'm hearing pretty good things. Good things so far, so that's exciting.
Yeah, and look, and Mission Impossible is another one of those franchises that we didn't really mention earlier, but you think about the longevity of it, and it's different than something like the Jurassic World, for example.
Right.
Like that, I don't know what the box office numbers are for those movies, but when people talk about the best franchises, I don't think anyone's claiming Jurassic World, but people will talk about Mission Impossible, especially Mission or like 3 onward, especially.
Well, yeah, it's because it's one of those franchises, and we don't see it very often. Franchises that have arguably gotten better as they got older. And this is, I'm not saying every entry is better than the last one, but there is this sense of upward trajectory with them, right? And that's kind of a rarity with most franchises in general.
Yeah, that's the brilliance of Tom Cruise. That's why we love him.
Movie star.
Movie star indeed. So, yeah, very much looking forward to that. Can't wait to see what he has in store, and I look forward to our conversation of Indiana Jones. So,
Yep.
At any rate, be on the lookout for all of that. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hopefully this wasn't as bleak as perhaps we laid it out to be at the beginning of the show. I think we had a lot of fun here.
I think it was good. I think we looked at it in a way that we were trying to, uncover some solutions to this that led to positivity.
I agree.
And that's the difference. We're not just whining and dining on all this crap. So
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that said, hopefully you enjoyed it all. Stay tuned for next week. Best of the year so far. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Oh, man. Really hoping Pixar can turn it around. Go,
Me too.
Pixar.
Happy birthday, PTA. That's at least important.